was littered with references to the word global. And I thought, I can't put it out there. I can't put it out there with that word appearing so many times. So at the very last minute, I recalled it from the printers, and I changed the manuscript at some cost, and I changed every reference to global to worldwide, and then I put it out there. And I went through a period where, when I first came out as a spinning ball denier, of course I was mocked and ridiculed, and certain people unsubscribed from my channel. We've all been through that, right? Any of us that stick our heads above the parapet. But I was having a conversation with Dave Weiss at breakfast this morning about this. I now speak at a lot of conferences and events. I do one pretty much every weekend through the year. And so it means I get to network and mingle with a lot of critically minded truth seekers. And I have to say, in my personal experience of having conversations with these people at all kinds of events, I honestly have to say that I feel we're at an 80-20 stage in terms of acceptance that we can't possibly live on a spinning ball. I'm talking 80% of people of this sort of caliber are now having those kind of doubts. I feel that's the point that we're at. So that's a pretty major achievement. What I'm going to get into in this presentation is a couple of dynamics. We're getting into some spiritual, metaphysical territories and points. And I want to start with the phenomenon of predictive programming. So this is the act of placing depictions of a real-world event, or a fake event, which the public is going to be asked to believe, into works of popular culture. So it could be music videos, we'll see a few of those. It could be movies, it could be TV shows, it could be cartoons, like The Simpsons. They've got previous when it comes to this sort of thing. And just to give you an introduction into the phenomenon of predictive programming, I've got a clip here from the guy who popularised the term. It's the late Scottish researcher Alan Watt, sadly no longer with us, but here's a brief clip of him breaking down what he comprehended to be the phenomenon that's become known as predictive programming.
It's almost like coupling an idea with the drama and suddenly a virus into your subconscious, and you're being programmed, and it's called predictive programming. The technique is ancient and is no old science. Plato, in his Republic, talks about the culture industry of his own day, and how it was essential not only for maintaining control over the people by the elite, but that they had to control everything that was given to the public. In other words, anything the public saw in drama on stage was authorized.
Interestingly, the problem with the sound setting there was that it was set to something called black magic. I think there's a sign there somewhere. So this is from my book, Musical Truth Volume 1, just picking up on what I've learned from Alan Watt and going into why this gets done. One of the dark principles of their ideological tenets is that if you tell people what you're doing, even if it's telling them wordlessly through symbols or numbers, then you've somehow got their implied consent because they haven't said no. And to not say no is to tacitly say yes in their mentality. So that, in their mind, relieves the burden of karma that would ordinarily come down upon them for directing these actions. Because they don't actually take these actions, they get their order-following house slave dogs to do it for them. In their mind, because they told you in a wordless, occult way, then in some way that alleviates the karma because they did say it in some form. It's a sick, twisted way of looking at it. But then we are dealing with sick, twisted individuals. That's one reason why predictive programming, which is also sometimes referred to as revelation of the method, is the same idea. That was a term popularized by the researcher Fritz Springmeier. That's why it gets done. Another reason is when you take an event such as 9/11, we can single that out as an example, and we'll look at a couple in a moment. If you endlessly present depictions of that event, because it's known to be coming, into popular culture, because those parties that pulled off the events of 9/11 are working in conjunction with the owners of Hollywood, the owners of the music industry, they're all part of the same network at the end of the day, you establish a familiarity with what the public is going to be asked to believe because you've implanted into their subconscious mind, Jared touched on this earlier, what is going to be presented on the mainstream evening news. And then the third reason is the idea that energy goes where attention flows, so that you can actually get large numbers of people to make an energetic connection with a certain idea, again, by implanting images of it, representations of it, into their collective subconscious mind. So 9/11 does become a classic example of how this dynamic works. There have been several hundred examples of predictive programming in popular culture which pertain to the events of September 11th, 2001, in the decades before it happened. Here's just a few examples. Going back to 1976, there's examples going back to the 1950s, in fact, indicating that this particular event was planned decades in advance. The sick, twisted psychopaths that we're talking about here plan their moves a very long time in advance. They play the long game, they display incredible levels of patience. Many more examples here, many popular Hollywood movies. These would have been watched by potentially billions of people around the world. And so these images get soaked up like a sponge into their subconscious mind, and then the real event gets presented and all that familiarity is already there. Here's a classic example from the music industry of a sleeve depicting the very events that we were asked to believe took place on September 11th, 2001. This is from a little known hip-hop act called The Coup. It's an album called Party Music. It was released in June 2001, so just a few weeks before those events. And for some reason, this sleeve shows the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center exploding in exactly the way they were seen to just a few weeks later. And the frontman of the group there, Boots Riley, is seen holding some sort of remote control detonator, very strongly suggesting that that event constituted a controlled demolition. Then we have this classic. Many of you may have seen it. If you haven't, it's a shocker. It's from the British rock group Supertramp. It's their album Breakfast in America, which was released in early 1979. So on the sleeve, you've got a view from an aeroplane window. You've got a breakfast tray made up to look like the Manhattan skyline. You've got the waitress there in orange, serving a glass of orange juice, and you've got the name of the band, Supertramp, across the top of the screen. It's been worked out that if you do a mirror image reversal of that sleeve, because of course we do live in a satanically inverted society in which everything is back to front and upside down, a very interesting effect occurs. Let's take a look at it. So now, above the Twin Towers, the U and the P of Supertramp start to look very much like a 9 and an 11. So there's some subliminal programming being soaked up by the record buying public in 1979, a couple of decades ahead of the event that was known to be coming. We have some video examples from the music world too, such as this one. So that's the introduction to the U2 song, The Unforgettable Fire, get it? From 1985, which for no apparent reason and bearing no relevance to the song, opens with that nighttime shot of the World Trade Center towers. And then in comes the New World Order Illuminati poodle, Bono. Yeah, I mean, I could get into Bono, but I'll save that for another conversation. Another example we have is a Depeche Mode video for their song Enjoy the Silence. There were two versions of this video. This is the alternative one, released in 1990. Have a look at this. So it says there, come crashing into my little world. And that video was shot atop the World Trade Centers in 1990, so 11 years before those events. They do like their numbers, we'll see plenty more of those. Another example here. Body size represent, brown paper bag. Very subtle, very subliminal. You just see a skyscraper there. It's not actually one of the WTC towers, but it looks very similar. And you just see the silhouette of an aeroplane flying past. That was 1997, so we're getting closer to the event there. Then we've got this little contribution from Prince to factor into the equation. So there's endless discussion about the true nature of Prince. I've done shows on this. My second Musical Truth book has a whole appendix section at the back consisting of an essay by a guy named Dan Munro considering the dual aspects of Prince, how he seemed to embody the duality that's present within this reality. So 1 minute in his music, he'll be singing about basically sex, temptation, sin, but he would always balance it out by then putting out a song which was very deep, reflective, and spiritual in nature. He made various comments which suggest that he'd figured out who's really running this world and what it's really all about. He made some of those comments in interviews, but at the same time, he would often put out occult symbolism indicating that he's part of the club, so to speak. He's down with the Illuminati control system. So it doesn't add, or it doesn't make the confusion any easier to decipher when we factor in this piece of audio from a concert which Prince played in Utrecht, in the Netherlands. Got the Netherlands crew in the house for them. They still here? I think they've gone. So this was December 98, and at the very end of this show, this is what Prince had to say. So there it is. He says Osama bin Laden's getting ready to bomb. And that could be written off as bin Laden having been public enemy #1 at that point in 1998. He was already on the CIA watch list. Which is interesting because they created him. He was a CIA asset, going by the code name Tim Osman, before the myth of Osama bin Laden got created, because they needed a boogeyman to blame the events of 9/11 on. So you could write it off as just this random thing, if it weren't for the fact that one of his band members then says, 2001 hit me. So they give you the specific year that this event is going to happen. This suggests to me very strongly that Prince moved in such circles as to have had advanced knowledge of this agenda before it came in. We can also consider the reported death of Prince himself in 2016. 2016 was a very unlucky year for musicians. So it was bookended by the reported death of David Bowie in January. Notice I say reported death because we can't really be sure of anything. And at the very end of the year, we had the reported death of George Michael on Christmas Day. And in between those, on the 21st of April, the Queen's birthday, just a coincidence, nothing to worry about, Prince turns up dead, so we're told, at the age of 57 in an elevator, like you do. When you're a vegan and a health freak and you exercise every day, it just happens. So when it comes to what we were told about how Prince checked out, it seems there had been some predictive programming going on there too. And it seems the public was getting pre-warned and warmed up, ready for the news of Prince's demise. So, as I mentioned, The Simpsons has previous when it comes to letting people know what's coming in terms of agendas. Here's an episode from many years ago.
You finally did it! You mixed Buzz Cola with the smooth, rich taste of lemon.
Unfortunately, there are certain stars who won't do what we want.
What's their problem?
They're still alive.
And then we thought, who's good at killing celebrities?
Me!
That's right! Homer, would you be willing to acquire some more, accounts for us?
Well, it is awfully hot today. No, I'm too cold. Psycho killer, just to say.
Oh, there's a good one to finish on. So, the death of Prince foreshadowed in The Simpsons some years before it happened. Seeing Neil Armstrong's name there just reminds me of how horrific the state school system is. In the UK, I'm sure it's no different in the United States, but one of my daughters was studying at school so-called heroes. They had this thing running. And she came home one day and said, "Oh, we're learning about Neil Armstrong. He's a hero." That's what they're teaching kids in the regular school system, but I'm sure it's no great surprise to many of you. So as I said, 2016, on Christmas Day, George Michael turned up dead in bed, like you do. Many anomalies and discrepancies surrounding this one, connected to his partner, or what is said to be his partner, a guy by the name of Fadi Fawaz, deeply suspect individual. He was involved with Stephen Gately of the boy group Boyzone some years before he got with George Michael. And Stephen Gately dropped dead on holiday in Mallorca one day of sudden adult death syndrome. That's what it was called. There's been a lot of that around lately, hasn't there? So it could be said to have been ahead of its time. So we have the death of a man arguably most famous for the song Last Christmas I Gave You My Heart, turning up dead on Christmas Day of heart failure. But again, it's just a coincidence and nothing to worry about. There were an endless array of clues pertaining to the incoming death of George Michael in TV shows and movies leading up to 2016. I detail them in volume 2 of my book. Many examples. Here's just one of them from a movie titled Keanu, which was written and put out there by the comedian Jordan Peele. And this is how George Michael is depicted in this movie.
George Michael. You're George Michael.
So he's undergoing some sort of hallucinatory out-of-body experience, and he imagines that he's experiencing George Michael in some sort of heavenly realm, suggesting that he's passed over. As I say, there are many other movie references to this idea of George Michael being dead in the years before we were actually told he was. There's one movie that I mentioned in the book where there's a couple of characters in a public toilet in London, which is a sort of sly allusion to George Michael having been caught reportedly exposing himself in a public toilet. And one character says to the other, "Oh, careful, you'll end up dead like George Michael." And the other guy says, "George Michael's not dead." The other one goes, "Really? Are you sure?" So it's all very strange. It's as if we get pre-warned every step of the way. So the other big artist we were told passed away in 2016 was David Bowie. The morning after we were told that he died, Sky News wheeled out an individual by the name of Jack Stephen. Some of you might know where I'm going with this, but if you don't, you're in for a treat. So instead of bringing out somebody like Tony Visconti, for instance, the super producer who worked with David Bowie for many years to reflect on his life and his achievements, Sky News brought out a guy named Jack Stephen who nobody had heard of before. He's said to have been a music industry executive with many decades experience, but nobody knew him. Anyway, he made this one solitary appearance on Sky News, and then he sort of disappeared back into the shadows. Here he is.
I was just saying earlier that I actually felt that part of me had died. I have to say that that's how much influence he's had to be at thousands.
Does he remind you of anyone? He says, "I actually felt as if a part of me had died." Yeah, so some questions arise. Is it possible that could be David Bowie himself under heavy disguise? Is it possible that when we're told certain celebrities have passed away, what's actually happened is that they've been allowed to retire their public persona, bearing in mind that David Bowie is a stage name? You know, the individual, the living, breathing man was David Robert Jones. So maybe the David Bowie alter ego is what's been retired, but David Robert Jones has been allowed to live out his remaining years in obscurity under some sort of witness protection program type scenario. Maybe he's been whisked off to some hidden lands that we don't know about, in keeping with the theme of this event. Or maybe it's just a coincidence and this guy really does look and sound exactly like David Bowie. Anyway, let's try and catch up with Jack Stephen more recently. There's very few videos of him online, so if you want to check him out for yourself, you ain't going to find much. This is why I say he was a strange choice to be wheeled out as a tribute. Very few photographs of him. I was only able to find one other video anywhere on the internet. So this purports to be from a 2022 documentary. Here he is again.
The recording of Under Pressure is, I guess, three C's. Coincidence, creativity, and compromise. The coincidence being that Bowie and Queen were all on one show in Switzerland at the same time. The creativity came out of them jamming together, and more importantly, fueled by cocaine and red wine, Mercury and Bowie separately went into the vocal booth with no real rehearsals.
He's aged horribly, I'm sure you might agree. There are elements of satanic mockery which take place here. As I mentioned a while back, unfortunately, organised society at every level is controlled by dark occultists. Whether people choose to accept that or not, these individuals, these networks, have a comprehension of how this realm, this reality works. They know how to harness energy and manipulate it, and that's why they do things like satanic rituals, for example. But one tenet which ties into these sort of practices is the idea of placing the truth in plain sight, and that ties into satanic mockery, morbid mockery of what they perceive to be the ignorance and the profanity of the masses. And as far as these sick, demented psychopaths are concerned, they would lump the likes of us at a conference like this in with the masses that you'll find out there going to Taco Bell and KFC and McDonald's and all the rest of it. They see us all as useless eaters. They don't seem to make any distinction between us all. And that's why they like to mock us to our faces. We've heard some information already, there'll be plenty more this weekend, about how they mock us in terms of what they ask us to believe concerning the true nature of where we live and what lies out there. I'll leave that information to the other presenters. But we often get little symbolic clues presented to us in the form of hand signs, such as we see a young Michael Jackson doing here. And when it comes to what may or may not have happened to Michael Jackson himself, and whether he really checked out on the 25th of June 2009 at the age of 50, as we're told he did, here's another one to factor into the equation. So this becomes quite similar to the Jack Stevens situation. When we were told that Michael Jackson had died, Larry King on CNN did a show where he wheeled out a guy going by the name of Dave. Many of you may have seen the video. If you missed it, here he is.
Joining us now here in Los Angeles, Miko Brando, who was with us almost every night after this untimely passing. Longtime Michael Jackson friend attending the funeral. And Dave, yes, that's his name, Dave. He was David Rothenberg. He was set on fire in 1983, suffered, as you can see, terrible scars. Michael Jackson befriended him and paid for a lot of his surgeries. Dave is also attending the burial. Why Dave?
Well, to liberate myself from the confines of my father's criminality.
He caused the fire?
Yeah, he is a criminal, and he caused all this. To free myself of his name and his legacy, I decided to become my own person through changing my name.
Does he sound like anyone? I mean, there are different possibilities here. It may well be that that's not Michael Jackson in disguise. They may simply be taking the piss by putting someone out there to cause us to ask these kind of questions. Just like with the Jack Stephen guy, you know, deliberately making them look and sound like the artist that we've told has just passed away, just to fuck with our minds, representing that mockery that they like to make of us, and just making it almost impossible to get to the truth of the matter in so many of these cases. A more up-to-date example of how predictive programming, revelation of the method, has been dropped on us big time, and psychological warfare of a military grade has been put upon the populations of the world by the governments that we're told are there to keep us safe and represent our interests, comes from the COVID-19 agenda of the last 3.5 years that we've all lived through, whatever part of the world we might come from. I mean, that alone should stand as evidence that the world is not run by the people that we're told it is. Otherwise, don't you think individual governments around the world would have made some different decisions about what needed to be done over the past 3.5 years? Not that I accept personally there was any threat whatsoever, because it was just another manufactured psyop. But don't you think the odd country might have said, well, no, we don't think we should be locking down, we don't think masks are necessary, and we think things should be done this way. Or some nations might say, well, we don't think this is a threat at all. We don't see any evidence that this is harming people in any way. But what we did see was all the governments of the world coming together in tandem, in lockstep, if you like, implementing the exact same measures at the exact same time. And it's not as if there was any shortage of pre-preparation for this one either. When it comes to movies, TV shows, also music videos, we have, once again, as with 9/11, an endless selection of examples. Here's a clip from the movie Contagion, released in 2010.
Continue to be evaluations of several drugs with variants among them. But right now, our best defense has been social distancing. No handshaking, staying home when you're sick, washing your hands frequently.
So it's a nice 10-year lead-in there through that movie. You know, Matt Hancock, who was the UK Health Secretary during the COVID nonsense, actually admitted that he took his guidance for what needed to be done in the UK in the wake of COVID from that movie. He actually came out and said that. He said, oh, well, we're just doing things the same way they did in Contagion. And the vast majority of the British public just accepted that. You know, Hancock is a criminal and he does not deserve to be walking around a free man. Same with Johnson and all the rest of them. There they are, openly mocking us to our faces. There was footage of Hancock fake crime, indicating that it's 2 more 6s, so 666. So 666, of course, appears in the book of Revelation in the Bible. It states that it's the number of the beast or of a man, meaning that it's not an inherently evil number in itself. Numbers, symbols are not evil in themselves until they have some kind of meaning, some kind of consciousness, some kind of intent applied to them. So 666 can be used for benevolent purposes. But when it falls into the hands of dark occultists who represent evil and who do not have humanity's best interests at heart, it takes on some very negative connotations. That's when it becomes the symbolic number of the beast. Some researchers feel that it's actually a reference to our human physiology, in that we're made up of 6 atoms, 6 protons, 6 neutrons. That's where you get the 666. It's the very basis of life itself. So by making the number evil, or by giving it evil connotations, it's again satanic inversion. It's turning it on its head, and it's making out that the very act of being human is in some way evil, represents darkness. Again, it's just part of this inversion. So this brings us on to Dave Grohl. Let's put Dave Grohl on blast. Of the Foo Fighters. Before this, of course, he was a part of Nirvana in the Kurt Cobain era. Well, old Dave seems very fond of the number 666. Don't know if you've noticed. This is a restaurant bill which came to $333 when Dave went out for a meal. Must have been one hell of a meal. And being the generous guy that he is, he decided to round up the bill with a $333 tip so that it came to $666. He does seem to like flirting with that particular number. When you apply some gematria to the name of his band, the Foo Fighters, you find that F is the 6th letter of the alphabet and O is the 15th, so you add it together and you get 666 in the very name of his band. There was also this movie, which came out a couple of years ago, titled Studio 666. It's a sort of spoof thing, it's supposed to be a dark comedy, and in it, Dave Grohl and his band are holed up in this creepy old country house trying to record an album. And all sorts of paranormal things happen there. The band members get possessed by these entities, and they end up dying one by one, including the drummer from the Foo Fighters, Taylor Hawkins, who's depicted as being decapitated by a cymbal a short while before Taylor Hawkins turned up dead for real in very suspicious circumstances. So some researchers who get into these dark and dastardly realms of research feel that that may have constituted some kind of ritual sacrifice. Unfortunately, it is my duty to report that this sort of activity does go on in the entertainment industry, in Hollywood, in music. Family members of prominent celebrities who often go on to have very successful careers often do turn up dead in very suspicious circumstances. I've detailed many of them in my books. So it seems the industry is not beyond the odd sacrifice of one of their own every now and again when it suits some agenda or other. So many, many famous people have been pictured doing this so-called 666 sign. It often gets written off, people have excuses and they say, oh, they're just doing it because the photographer told them to. They said it would look cool, they're doing it to look fashionable. But really, all of them, you could write off a couple as just one of those things, but it just keeps happening. Elvis Presley, going way back in the day, there he is. This hand signal means something. It's a method of communication between those in the know, those with the eyes to see. It indicates that they're part of the club, they're down with the program, and they're pushing agendas. Often they do it in a mind-controlled state, I would argue. MK Ultra mind control coming out of those nice folks at the CIA is very real, particularly in entertainment. It has different derivatives, there's monarch programming and beta sex kitten programming and all the rest of it. Effectively, it's trauma-based mind control, which is very closely linked to satanic ritual abuse. That goes on from early childhood as well. And it ensures that these celebrities stay in line, do what they're supposed to do, stay with the program, and keep getting the control system's work done. So often, I feel they'll be flashing up signals like this without even being consciously aware of it. But we've just got endless examples. Here's a sort of latter-day Michael Jackson doing the same thing. Here's Beyonce. All doing it, right? All part of the same club. Even this one. Whatever it is. Whatever that thing is. I mean, we had Matt Hancock in Britain, that was bad enough. America, this is your president, really? What is going on? What a world. We're trying to make sense of all of this. And so we continue with this magic number of 666. And I've got some data here which was provided to me by my good friend Patrick O'Carroll. Big shout out to Patrick. He lives out in Switzerland. He's got a quite brilliant mind. He seems to be on stuff like this every single day, sends me very long emails full of all kinds of data. So he's kindly provided just a few examples of how 666 crops up in the official measurements and figures that we're given by NASA and all these other official sources concerning the place where we live, the nature of the Earth, and all connected bodies. So we'll start with this one. He's written, how the tilted, spinning globe obeys Freemasonic numerology. Because Freemasonry is a big key to all this stuff getting done. It's the apparatus, it's the structure through which much of the mind control and the psyops get perpetrated. Plus the ritual, activity that goes on as well. So Patrick says, the spinning globe, Earth, obeys Freemasonic numerology by kindly agreeing to remain tilted at approximately 66.6 degrees to the horizontal. Roughly 23.4 degrees to the vertical translates to roughly 66.6 degrees to the horizontal. So it's a little inside joke. It's hidden in plain sight unless you go out of your way to do the math that 90 degrees minus roughly 23.4 equals roughly 66.6. So quite the coincidence, I'm sure you would agree. The tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, in terms of what we're told, they also obey Freemasonic numerology by generously agreeing to commence at roughly 66.6 degrees from the poles. Tropic of Cancer, again, roughly 23.4 degrees north of the equator, means roughly 66.6 degrees from the North Pole, because 90 minus 23.4 is 66.6. Then the Tropic of Capricorn, roughly 23.4 degrees south of the equator, means roughly 66.6 degrees from the South Pole, because 90 minus 23.4 is 66.6. What else could it be? You see how they're taking the piss with all this stuff? And I know we'll see much more evidence of it throughout the rest of this weekend. The mass of Betelgeuse, from what we're told about it, is 6.66 million times that of the Earth. I mean, of course this is nonsense, it's all bullshit, but this is what we're asked to believe. It's the same as when you go back to these predictive programming examples in movies and such with 9/11, they're asking you to believe that 19 Arab hijackers armed with box cutters did it, directed by a man on a dialysis machine halfway up a remote mountain range in Afghanistan. That's all nonsense. But it's what they're asking you to believe that becomes important in terms of what they're putting into the subconscious mind of the general public. It doesn't matter that it's nonsense, it's what they want people to accept. The Earth orbits at 66,660 miles per hour. How can it be any other figure? This is what you get when you type it into Google. Earth's orbital speed averages 29.78 kms, which translates to 66,660 miles per hour. It just goes on and on. The sun also agrees to obey Freemasonic numerology. How gracious of it. It agrees to have a mass that corresponds to exactly 333,000 Earth masses. So 33 is a very important number in Freemasonry. You have 33 degrees in the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, which officially is the highest level that you can get to, though according to many occult researchers, there are many levels above that true initiates go on to achieve. But 33 is a very important number. It represents the number of vertebrae in the human spine. This goes into some spiritual ideas as well, such as the raising of Kundalini energy up the human spine, resulting in conscious awakenings and heightened levels of consciousness. So these are all occult teachings that come through Freemasonry. Jesus is said to have died at the age of 33 because he's symbolic of the sun. It's astrotheology. The number 33 just gets endlessly encoded into it. So here we're talking about the sun, and we get the number 33 being half of the 666, of course, encoded into it. Okay, this is interesting. What's going on here? Very interesting. Seems to have frozen. At 33, exactly. It's probably going to be slide number 33 as well, isn't it? Okay, here we go. Didn't like that, did it? Oh, we're going backwards now. Okay, here's some more. Plenty of information provided by Patrick. The Earth's axis, its orbital inclination around the Sun, is 66.6 degrees. The Earth orbits the Sun at 66,600 miles per hour, yeah. The Earth's circumference, we're told, is 600 times 6 times 6 nautical miles. The speed of sound is 666 knots per second. The force of gravity on Earth is 666 newtons. You're getting bored of this yet? The curvature of a square mile is 0.666 feet. The Arctic and Antarctic circles are exactly 66.6 degrees. Astronaut Peggy Whitson spent 666 days in space. How could she not? The distance to the moon is 6 times 60 times 666 miles. It's all complete nonsense. The diameter of the moon is 6 times 6 times 60 miles. No, it's not, but you get the idea. Sunset is divided by 3 degrees, 666. There it is, it's all there. You know, there's 666s for days. A few examples of further mockery through popular culture. I wanted to include this one because it's an excerpt from the James Bond movie Diamonds Are Forever, released in 1971. It has Vegas relevance because a big part of the story is set in Las Vegas, and Sean Connery's James Bond character is on the trail of a diamond smuggling ring which has led into Vegas, and he's after this scientist who he sees getting into a van and driving out of Vegas into the desert, into the Nevada desert. And so Bond stows away in the van, and he finds himself being driven out to this remote desert location, and he ends up descending several stories below ground into an underground secret military base. In Nevada. What does that remind me of? Area 51, right? There's another 6 when you add it up. So it seems to be a very clear allusion to these so-called DUMBs, deep underground military bases. It's in the Nevada desert, so it seems to be a reference to Area 51, arguably the best known of these. And there's a very strange scene. It's actually a very strange movie. It's not like any other of the official James Bond films. It's very quirky and it's got lots of in-jokes and it's not to be taken particularly seriously.
Behind the rock! Come on! What the hell is this, amateur night? Stop it, Harry! Get him on the other machine, better than the toy. Tell that phone, buddy!
Probably an actual NASA film set. And what would cinema audiences have made of that in 1971? Because that was right in the midst of the Apollo program, or non-program. So the filmmakers appeared to have been telling people that that entire scenario was fake as fuck. and implanting it into a James Bond film. But how many people at the time would have known what was being communicated to them? Of course, now we know better. Music videos. A few clues as to what many of these musicians may have known. Again, much of it may amount to mockery of the profane masses, but we have the REM video and song, Man in the Moon. If you believe, they put a man in the moon. And Michael Stipe, the frontman of REM, would be one to know a thing or two about a thing or two. Heavily mind-controlled, I would suggest, as evidenced by some of his stage performances. But he's a military brat. And this is the key to so much. My work goes into this majorly, the work of the great researcher Dave McGowan, who did the book Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, focusing on Laurel Canyon in the Hollywood Hills of Los Angeles, focused on the unending amount of military family connections to prominent musicians, going all the way back to the early days of the industry. McGowan's work demonstrated that in so many cases, the fathers of prominent musicians who go on to become very influential, shaping scenes, shaping entire genres, are high-ranking military personnel. Not regular rank-and-file foot soldiers, but admirals, generals. You know, the classic example is the father of Jim Morrison of The Doors, Admiral George Stephen Morrison, who just happened to be the naval commander in charge of the fleet of ships involved in the Gulf of Tonkin false flag PSYOP, which springboarded America into the Vietnam War. Meanwhile, his son, Jim, is out there as the poster child for this anti-war, anti-establishment, counterculture generation. How do you reconcile that then? You know, fans of The Doors will say, well, Jim was just rebelling against his parents' values. But you have endless examples of it. Pretty much every musician that came out of Laurel Canyon in those counterculture years of the 1960s had high-ranking military fathers, including Michael Stipe of REM. His father flew helicopters in Vietnam, which would suggest that Stipe himself would know a thing or two, such as NASA, space, the moon landings are all complete fake. They're fraudulent, and he seems to have put that in that song. Are there any other musical clues that we can glean? Well, one of the most controlled bands of them all is arguably the most successful, the best known rock band of all time, the Beatles. You wouldn't expect the Beatles to disappoint when it comes to this one, and they don't. Many researchers feel that the Beatles were a product of Tavistock, the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in London, one of the major social engineering PSYOP think tanks that cook up culture creation and things of this nature and produce lifetime actors. Sir, plenty of sirs in my work, Paul McCartney, or whoever he is, always, Billy Shears, yeah, always crops up in my presentations. It's actually impossible for me to do a talk, even at an event like this, without Paul McCartney's name cropping up. I should start a drinking game, where every time I mention his name, you take a swig of a liquor of your choice, and everyone will be rolling around on the floor by the end of the presentation. So here he is. This is the Beatles song, Fool on the Hill. This appeared in their Magical Mystery Tour film, preposterous film. And this is one of the songs from it.
He never seems to notice what the fool on the hill seems sees the sun going down, and the eyes in his head see the world spinning round.
So he's looking quite moronic at the end there, because he's the fool on the hill. And the eyes in his head see the earth spinning round. Is that a clue? In that only a fool would believe that? Is that what the Beatles were communicating? You know, you would expect it to come through a group such as them, given their heritage. This was the title image to my presentation, because I think it's quite a provocative one. Kate Bush, definitely an artist who knows some things. Also mind-controlled, I would suggest. Pretty much all the major ones are. They've been subject to that style of programming to keep them on track, so they continue to push agendas. But with that sort of programming often comes great knowledge. Prince knew a lot. Kate Bush knew a lot. She put it into her songs. She's got a song simply titled Pi, where she's talking about that amazing transcendental number. The entire song is her talking about pi and reciting the number. She's got a song called Experiment 4, where she's talking about sonic weaponry. She's talking about sound weapons and how they're cooked up in government laboratories. And she had this song, Sat in Your Lap, where she's pictured on the sleeve, wearing a dunce's hat, holding a globe, as if suggesting that only a dunce would believe such a thing. So, you know, Kate Bush wasn't stupid. She had her song Cloudbusting as well, which is all about the orgone energy technology of Wilhelm Reich. It's a fascinating video featuring Donald Sutherland, the actor, portraying the part of Wilhelm Reich. Were we getting a clue? There's a rock group out of Illinois who got started in the late 60s called Head East. They had an album called Flat as a Pancake. Is that a clue as to the true cosmology of the place in which we live? Did that band know? Got some lyrics from a Meatloaf song here. Take a listen.
I know that I will never be politically correct. And I don't give a damn about my lack of etiquette. As far as I'm concerned, the world can still be flat.
Seems the odd clue has been peppered around through the decades in various songs. If only we know where to look. Red Hot Chili Peppers and Toto there, another couple of lyrical clues. Thomas Dolby, the British musician, put out an album in 1984, simply titled The Flat Earth.
Really?
The lyric to the title song goes, "The earth can be any shape you want it, any shape at all. Dark and cold, or bright and warm, long or thin or small. But it's home and all I ever had. And maybe why for me, the earth is flat." Pretty revolutionary idea back in 1984. Not so much these days, thankfully. Oasis, the British band out of Manchester, not a group I've ever trusted. I never bought the idea that they're working class heroes, just these couple of brothers from the mean streets of Manchester that made it big during the Britpop era in the mid-90s. They were pitched up against Blur in a sort of rivalry, which was a manufactured dialectic. It was all part of trying to make Tony Blair palatable to young people, young voters in Britain in the mid-90s by creating this idea of Cool Britannia, as it was called at the time. A classic social engineering psyop, probably cooked up in Tavistock. Oasis were a big part of that. There's a famous picture of Noel Gallagher of Oasis meeting Tony Blair at number 10 Downing Street at a champagne reception in 1997. And Blair's being presented as cool, down with the kids, down with youth culture, presiding over this revival in British culture, you know. This was before he turned out to be the vicious, straight, evil, warmongering psychopath that he really is. But they had to get him in office. And a big part of that was creating this Britpop, Cool Britannia movement, and Oasis played their part in that, knowingly, I would suggest. They were signed to the Creation Records label, run by Alan McGee, who's a dark occultist into the works of Aleister Crowley and Chaos Magic and things of this nature. Anyway, it seems Oasis have offered us a photo shoot for that album, again with the Globe. The Eurythmics, in their 1983 song Sweet Dreams Are Made of This. In the video, Annie Lennox is seen at a desk with a globe on prominent display. That video is full of sort of mind control imagery. We also have this one, the video to Belinda Carlisle, Heaven is a Place on Earth, her big hit. The video to this was directed by Diane Keaton, the Hollywood actress who was in The Godfather. I was watching that movie on the plane over yesterday. So here's a clip from that video to the Belinda Carlisle song. I find it a little bit creepy. See what you think.
Ooh, baby, do you know that's what? Ooh, heaven is a place on earth. They say in heaven, love comes first. We'll make heaven a place on earth. Ooh, heaven is a place on earth.
So the whole video smacks of mind control to me. I've been doing this research a long time. I know what sort of symbolism to look out for. You got those kids in the creepy face masks and it's straight MK Ultra. It's all this dark stuff. And for some reason, you've just got all these globes. They're holding up these globes. I know the song's called Heaven is a Place on Earth, but I think there's some more subliminal programming going on there. Then we've got this incredible record from 1983 called The Crown, which was put out there by Gary Bird. Gary Bird and the GB Experience. I loved this record when it first emerged. It talks about ancient civilizations and particularly black culture and the contributions that it's made to the advancement of humanity. So Gary Bird, as well as being a rapper, is also a historian and a lecturer, and he was very much into this idea of African civilizations having seeded other parts of humanity. It's an incredible record, really mind-blowing lyrics. So here's a little excerpt from that. So when he says, well, some had doubts that the world was round, I don't interpret that as a diss. It's not him saying that that's an acceptable belief system. I think what he's saying is that ancient civilizations knew damn well that the earth is not round, it's not a spinning ball. And he's communicating that in that song. That's my takeaway from it. So, in conclusion, although a lot of the information that I've presented and continue to through my books and podcasts and videos and all the rest of it is obviously very dark and devastating in nature, ultimately, I do find it very empowering that we simply can now have this knowledge. in a way that we could not have done just a few years ago. It's now possible to do this type of research. We'll be hearing more about it in this conference. With every passing year, we gain more knowledge about the place in which we live and what really goes on here, who's really running things, the methods, the tactics that they use. And ultimately, that has to be empowering. It's actually a great privilege that today we're able to do this style of research for ourselves and to come to this knowledge by ourselves. There's information that's been kept from the likes of us for decades, centuries, even millennia, which now we're able to uncover and share amongst each other. It's an incredible process. It's very much underway, and it's only headed in one direction. All this information that's come out in just the past few years ain't going anywhere. It's not going back in the box. It's only going to lead to more and more people getting on board with the sort of subjects that we discuss and starting to pay attention to them in a way that they never did before. That applies to all kinds of things. It applies to the nature of this earth, what it really is, as well as everything that goes on within it. So ultimately, I find that very encouraging. As I mentioned earlier, I really think, through my personal experience, we're at a stage among critical thinkers, obviously not the normies, not the masses, got a long way to go with them, the work remains. But among those who have shown a propensity towards the uncovering of truth, I think we're at a stage where about 80% of those people would now accept that the spinning ball is a great big fat lie. That's a good thing. 20% to go, and if we keep chipping away, eventually we'll get to where we need to be. You know, an analogy that I often keep in mind is that if you've got a mountain in front of you that you have to get past. It's a great movie actually, directed by William Friedkin called Sorcerer. It's a little known film, 1977. It's a remake of an earlier one from the 50s. And you've got these four guys in the wilds of Central America, and they have to deliver lorry loads of nitroglycerin to put out a massive fire that is raging in an oil well in the area. And so they're driving these trucks through this perilous landscape. And there's this one point where they come across this great big tree trunk lying in their path. And they're thinking, well, how the hell are we going to get past this? It's just impossible. And one of them has the idea of planting some of the dynamite that they've got in the truck, in the tree trunk, and blowing the bloody thing up, which they do, and then they can get the truck through and continue on their journey. And I often keep that analogy in mind. It can seem impassable sometimes. It can seem like we've got a mountain in front of us and we're never going to get to the other side. And for as long as there's only a few of us working on the job, no, we're not going to get past it. But there's more than a few of us now, and the numbers are growing every day, and eventually we will reach that critical mass where we have enough people to get the job done and get us to the other side where we need to be. It's a process that's underway. I'm very happy to see it. We're all playing our part in it, and we have to continue to do so, and then we'll get to where we need to be. Thanks for listening. Thank you. Thanks very much. So I've come in a little ahead of time, and I did like the idea of taking a few questions, maybe, if anyone's got any. So if we have a roving mic out there somewhere, I think we got time for a little Q&A.
I got a roving mic right here. I can bring it over, do it Donahue style. You ready?
Okay.
people were taken off because they were about to say something, or they sort of relinquished their role for their safety. And then Anthony Bourdain, if you have any comment on him.
I don't know a whole lot about him specifically. With these celebrities that we're told have died, I think you have to look at each case in isolation. So we were told that Jim Morrison died at the age of 27 in a bathtub in his Paris apartment. I ain't buying that because of who his father was. Jim was connected, and I believe that he was retired off and allowed to disappear off into obscurity. With some artists, Chris Cornell, Chester Bennington, seems pretty clear to me that they were about to uncover some stuff that they knew about pedophilia and child sex trafficking and such, and so they had to be taken out. Prince, I don't really know. Michael Jackson, David Bowie, you know, the jury's kind of out on those. Elvis Presley, I don't accept that Elvis died when we're told he did. You know, I think he lived on for some time. He could still be alive now even. I just think you have to look at each one individually and examine the evidence, and you're going to find all kinds of different explanations. Okay.
Thank you. All right, next question is over here.
Yeah, excellent presentation. Have you looked into the cloning or non-human hypotheses? Do you have anything to say about whether these people are all born and bred in standard manner?
Yeah, there's a guy called Donald Marshall who's spoken about that. He's had a lot to say about these underground cloning facilities. I've not looked at it to any great extent. My first impression of it is that it sounds a little far-fetched. I know that Flat Earth did when I first came across that. So not to say that it can't be true, but it's not an idea that's resonated with me yet, and it's one that I think requires a bit of further research.
Sure, let's take one on one sometime. Thank you.
Hi, Mark.
Hi there.
I love the amount of research that you've done on this topic, and it's been very enlightening. And I just have one simple question.
Sure.
Autograph my book.
I didn't hear that, sorry.
Will you autograph my book?
Sure, absolutely. That was an easy question.
All right. Any other questions? Raise your hand. You. Maybe Chicago.
Yeah, Mark.
Hi there.
Dave, John from Chicago. And you talk about predictive programming, and I've seen the 9/11 stuff from years, and The Simpsons and all that other stuff. Now, what about the stuff that's happening now that's going to be happening? Like Project Bluebeam, and do you see stuff like that? Or what do we see now that what's now going on programming?
Good question.
Yes, the fulfillment of the New World Order master plan, basically, Agenda 2030, and these smart cities that they want us all to be living in, this idea of not being able to travel and 15-minute cities and all this sort of stuff. So there's a lot of that programming going into movies now. I honestly feel that we collectively, though, can head a lot of this stuff off, and I think we have. I think through the exposure of the COVID agenda, through so many vigilant researchers and all these protests and these freedom rallies that have sprung up around the world, without all that having taken place, I think we collectively would be in a very dark and deadly place by now. I think things aren't as bad as they were intended to be because many of us have paid attention to them and done our best to expose them. So,
uh-oh.
Have I gone over time? Oh no,
No, you're good.
All right.
You're good.
So I think it's quite possible that we can thwart their plans by just not complying with them and exposing them as far as we can. And a lot of them don't come to fruition in the way that they would have liked them to. There's been a lot of Project Bluebeam stuff out there. I mean, we'll see if they get that audacious. If they really get that desperate, then that's an indication that they're losing, because it seems to be their last trump card to play. Yeah, I say just bring it on, let's get it over with.
I have a question over in this corner, right over here. No, look to your...
I can't see anything.
I'm sorry, look, yeah,
I'm blinded.
Howdy. My name is John Keeley, representing San Diego and followers of Jesus. As an Englishman, I'm curious why you didn't mention Jethro Tull skating away. I know he's not controlled opposition, anti-government, anti-religious, youth speaker, saw him skating away on the night of a new day. Clearly.
Don't know a lot about him, to be honest. Sounds like you know more than me. So yeah, I mean, people often say, oh, what about this artist, what about this band? There's only so many I can cover, you know. I don't get to cover everyone, but there's certainly enough evidence through the acts that I have exposed to show what's really going on, I feel.
Do we have time for one or two more?
Where are we? We're at, yeah, we have, yeah.
Okay.
Mark, one question. Have you done much research into the transhumanism reprogramming in entertainment?
Yeah, certainly transhumanism has been a big part of what's been getting pushed. That's been on the cards for quite a number of years. will.i.am is majorly guilty of that, or as I refer to him, Shill.I.am, of the Black Eyed Peas. You know, that group and that guy in particular have been pushing ideas of transhumanism and AI for years. And actually, Shill.I.am has now been named an ambassador for artificial intelligence to the World Economic Forum. You couldn't make it up. So he goes to Davos now, to those meetings, hangs out with Klaus Schwab and them, and he's an ambassador for AI. And this raises an interesting question, you know, what's a rapper, I use the term loosely, and producer doing hanging out in Davos if that's all he is? It's the same thing as Bono, going around hanging out with Bill Gates and George Bush and whoever else. Bono's supposed to be a rock singer, but he's clearly so much more than that. He's pushing agendas, he's a lifetime actor, and that's what these celebrities are used for. So, transhumanism thing seems to be a major part of where they want to take things. It's cropping up in all sorts of music videos now. There's even entire genres of music, like what passes for rap and hip hop now, which is actually nothing of the sort, but even reggae dancehall music is full of auto-tune, this awful bloody software program which makes the human voice sound robotic. That's been going on for a good 12, 15 years now. And it's popularizing the idea of the merging of humanity and technology. So it's more slow drip, psychological manipulation and programming. And yeah, that's been flavor of the month for quite a while now. Why don't we have one last proper question?
We'll do one last question.
A real question.
Okay, sorry. You know what? We're going to go with Jerome. Jerome, you're one of us. Come on.
Hi, thanks for coming. Appreciate you.
No worries.
What do you think about Agenda 2030?
Sorry, what?
Agenda 2030.
What do I think of it? Not a whole lot. Not impressed. It's not for me. Not the way I want to live. But obviously being pushed majorly through popular culture and entertainment, trying to popularize the idea. But it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. They're not going to take it there. Because we won't allow it. I think we're on time.
I think we are on time, so thank you, give it up! All right.
Oh, books over there, I've got copies of all my books if anyone's interested.